as we mentioned, investigators are working to determine if the attacker in Manchester had accomplices.
For more now on the case, we turn to Mark Jacobson, a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense and former deputy NATO representative in Afghanistan. So listen, a British official said Salman Abedi was known to authorities. What about his background really stands out to you?
Right. Thanks for having me this morning. I think what's interesting about Abedi is that he's what we call a second generation. In other words, his parents immigrated to Europe, to the United Kingdom, and then Abedi grew up a UK citizen. And that stands out for me because if you take a look at where extremism has developed within continental Europe and the UK, it's really that second generation. And that's an ideological problem, it's an educational problem, it's a societal problem. And that's the first thing I noticed. I was less concerned with his ethnicity, I was less concerned with that of his parents, but it's really that second generation piece that passed out, that stood out to me.
And Mark, Salman Abedi traveled to Libya and possibly Syria. Security experts have also stated that the sophistication of the bomb implied that he had collaborators. What do you make of that?
Well, there are two things in what you've just told me there. The first is the fact that the travel, especially to Libya and Syria, coupled with what appears in some of the news reporting out of the UK to be the belief that he harbored ill will, that he was a bad person, that he was someone who might cause trouble. These are signs and signals to the UK police, and again, we understand that Abedi was someone who was known to authorities. So I'll be curious to see where that line of investigation goes. Now, in terms of the sophistication of the device, there are a couple of things. One, he could have had assistance in the United Kingdom by someone who's been trained to do this. And my understanding at this point is there have been 3 arrests, but we're not quite sure what the association with Abedi is there or with this particular incident. The second piece is the travel to Libya in particular worries me because that's where he seems to have had a network. He seems to have traveled there several times, and we know that there are the individuals in Libya who have the ability to make sophisticated weapons, or fairly sophisticated weapons, like we appear to have seen in this case.
You know, we were talking about this weapon, this bomb. Is it something that he could have just learned on the internet without having extra assistance?
My understanding is no. My understanding is the type of bomb we're dealing with may have had a hydrogen peroxide base. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but what I understand from those people who are experts is that this is something that you can't just build by looking it up on the internet. The chemicals are inherently unstable, although widely available, which is what makes it something that terrorists would seek to go after.
And Mark, the UK raised the terror threat to its highest level. Do you think that that's from new intelligence, or are they perhaps worried about copycats?
I'd be surprised if this isn't based on very specific intelligence rather than a copycat. As we've discussed, the sophistication of this device, this sort of attack requires at least some level of planning, and there appears in this case to have been some sort of travel recently to Libya. My gut is that there is something that the British authorities are seeing that's indicative of an imminent attack, and that's why, in fact, we've seen soldiers on the streets in addition to police.
So military operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, they're progressing. ISIS seems to be at least being contained. But still, we can't stop these soft target attacks. And I think the question that a lot of people were asking after this Manchester attack is, is there a strategy? Do we have the ability to stop an attack on these locations that are meant to be open to the public?
I'm going to give you a very unsatisfying answer. First, you can't protect soft targets 100% unless you want to give up freedom, democracy, and the way of life we see in the West. The second unsatisfying piece is that no matter what's happening in Syria and Iraq with regards to rolling back ISIL gains in that area, this is an ideological struggle. This is a war of hearts and minds. This is a battle about extremist ideology. And what that means is we are going to see homegrown terrorists who have nothing to do or very little to do with the battlefield in Syria or Iraq. And so this war against terrorism is going to have to take place through different means other than military. This will be law enforcement, this will be intelligence, this will be engaging the societies in Europe. And so I don't think that the battlefield in Iraq or Syria is going to have a great deal of impact on the homegrown terrorism we're seeing in Europe.
Mark Jacobson, we thank you for your analysis. Thanks, Mark.
My pleasure.